All right, we're live. Michael Lastoria. So excited to have you. Michael Lastoria is the founder of N Pizza. Hello, everybody. We'll be talking a lot about a great company, something I'm really passionate about. And I'm also an investor. Full disclosure, discount everything I say during this talk. Really biased, but admittedly so, and love the company. So one, we're gonna be taking questions. So start sending your questions in now. They queue on the side, and I'll keep one eye over. And I'm really excited to get into it. And Michael, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. You know, I love any conversation with Matt Higgins.
Well, I love that. I love hearing that. You know what's great about you? You're so relatable, right? Like you clearly haven't been able to get groomed during the and that's why you look this way. Yeah, this is no. See, the little secret is you want to look this way, right? Like the rest of us are struggling. I tried to cut my hair, and but it just works for you.
I started the COVID style about 15 years ago.
And you own the COVID style.
Owning it right now, owning it.
All right. So we have so much to talk about. You had a huge week this week, right? You put out some groundbreaking policies, which I want to get into in a minute. But a lot of people don't know, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you. They don't know the N Pizza story, and that you epitomize this manifestor mindset, right? Somebody who has a vision for how things could be and should be, but they aren't at a moment in time, is looking at a space that you had no experience in, which was in fast casual, right? Came from a completely different industry. And that everything that has unfolded, there's been mistakes, obviously, and pivots along the way, but generally you architected this vision for where you are right now. And I want to go back in time to your career as an advertising executive, right? And maybe give a little bit of perspective of what made you launch N Pizza in the first place.
Yeah, I'll take it back to, I guess, all the way to where I grew up. I grew up in a small country town. It was a hamlet of 500 people, one flashing light, one bar. Went to kindergarten through 12th grade in the same building. I remember and talked to several friends about riding the bus from my house to school as a senior, right? Which isn't the most probably like rewarding thing that you ever imagined doing. My high school public graduating class was 35 people. Made my way to New York City when
Where did you graduate among those 35 people?
I don't even know if there was a ranking system. There was a valedictorian, but it was, the smartest amongst those dummies. So it wasn't that competitive. And my favorite sport growing up was football, something you know a little bit about, but we couldn't actually field a football team because we didn't have enough people in the school. So I ended up playing soccer instead.
Right. And you were good. And tennis.
I was okay. Yeah, I was a good enough athlete to be able to get out. I actually played college tennis, made my way to New York City at 22 years old, which was fascinating for me because I think I wanted to do the opposite of what I knew, which was growing up in the most rural place, going to the largest city in America and trying to figure out how do I become something of myself, right? Graduated with a general business degree. Really the only jobs I qualified for were sales jobs. I took a job in New York City doing inside sales, making about 350 cold calls a day, and that sucked. And it really wasn't something I wanted to do. So realized pretty quickly, like I had to either start a company and do my own thing or be beholden to, a career salesman, which nothing wrong with that, but just doesn't suit my personality. And so I decided to start my own company. And I found the guy who was the number one salesperson in the company I was working for, tapped him on the shoulder. And finally, after the fifth time of me asking him for some help in terms of tools and tips on how to sell, we were at a bar having a couple of beers, jumped in a New York City taxi cab and saw a small business card that was jammed under the Lexan plastic in the backseat of taxi cabs. We used to have the New York City map. So you had an idea of like what it was going to cost to get from, point A to point B. And we sort of looked at each other and we're like, why is there not advertising back here? And that's what launched my career as an entrepreneur. Started off doing taxi cab advertising. We launched in 4 markets within about 12 weeks of the idea, with literally like physical ads in the backseat of taxi cabs. And that got me into the ad space. We quickly pivoted that to digital marketing and then to customer acquisition. And within 4 short years, which is how long it took to sort of build and sell the business, we built the company up to about $25 million in revenue, $6.5 million in EBITDA, had investment bankers calling us, launched a process, met with 50 companies that were interested in buying the business, and ended up selling to a private equity group in New York City. So that was a complete sort of wild ride from landing in New York with relatively nothing, getting a job that paid pretty much all commission to then building something. And I think part of the luck that I had was that I didn't really have anything to lose. I actually think it's harder sometimes for people that do have something to lose, either have parents that have high expectations of a career that you're going to have or an academic institution that you're going to go to. And for me, it was all upside, because the worst thing that could happen is I'm back home where it all started. And that to me wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was very fearless and really sort of risk averse, because like I said, it was just all upside. At that point,
did that first big check change you? So you have your first exit. I don't know what the multiple of EBITDA would have been, but probably enough to definitely check out for a couple of years. Did it change your behavior?
It did. I mean, it's actually what sort of gave birth to what And Pizza would ultimately become. It was the first time where I realized that chasing the outcome versus enjoying the ride was the wrong thing to do, at least for me personally. I put a lot of stock in, okay, I'm going to invest everything I have. I'm not going to do the typical things that a 22-year-old does when they get to New York City, and gave up, 4 or 5 years of just putting my head down, working 7 days a week. And I was so obsessed with this idea of making money because I didn't grow up with money and grew up in the poorest county in New York State. And so it's sort of the obsession of what you don't know or what you don't have led me to a place where when I finally got some money, it was wildly unrewarding, mainly because nothing changed. I was the same human being the day before I sold the company as I was the day after. And I felt like there was going to be this hole inside of me that was going to be filled up with sort of gratitude and excitement around having something I never had. And it was the opposite of that, which I was actually a little bit depressed. I was frustrated. And it led to 3 very tough years of soul searching, trying to figure out what was my next thing, which led me into the advertising business, wanting to do something more creatively and scratching that itch, which eventually led me to And Pizza. And doing a lot of work in the marketing services side and the brand building side, I was building purpose and giving a lot of executives and founders a reason to show up for the very companies that they created, right? Starting with mission, vision, values before we do the advertising or brand work on top of that, really getting into the core of why are you doing this for the first place? And spending that time with so many entrepreneurs and executives, I started thinking to myself, why am I not creating my own version of what I think a brand should be, and really tackling the things that were important to me? And the initial core values of And Pizza were really focused on the values that I aspired to have when I grew up. So when I grow up, I want to be.
So I always wondered that too. Like people, Emmett Shine, right? He launched Pattern, but he's the brains, and his group is the brains behind Hims and a lot of other great brands, and probably came to the same realization. Like at the end of the day, especially in the DTC space, but just generally, right? Brands are the heart and soul of a company. And if you have the ability to emotionally connect, and you could build a team around you that has the skills that you may not possess, why not, launch your own? But a lot of people don't do that. In fact, most people don't do that. They stay in the service industry. Maybe they get resentful over time. Like I could do that, but they don't. What do you think sort of is different about your wiring that made you make the leap when so many other people don't?
Yeah, again, I think I go back to, I didn't know anything else, right? I as 22 years old, my first job was sort of being an entrepreneur. And so that is how I approach sort of career development. It's not looking for a company to work for, but looking for something that inspires me, looking for something I've never done before that is that I have a lot of curiosity around, right? Sort of intellectual curiosity, can I do this? And when I think about the idea behind And Pizza, it was really about, like I said, building a brand around a core set of values that I wanted to have. And it was really about promoting unity. And the initial idea of unity is sort of far from what it's become. It was about bridging the gap between the thinking in rural America with the place that I find myself, living in my 20s, which is New York City, which is much more liberal and deals with a whole different set of issues. The idea of how could I unite people from the country and those from the cities? They could think a little bit more, at least understand one another. How do we promote this whole broad-based idea of unity? And then when I looked at, okay, I've got that piece figured out, because the and was well before the pizza. And people don't really understand that. Like there was always the and, we just didn't know what we were going to point the and towards. It could have been.
And just a pause on that, not to like overlook that. It's not the way it normally goes, right? Somebody probably has a product, right, and has a problem that they want to provide the solution for, and they hire a firm to develop the ethos and the branding or whatnot. You had the premise, and you didn't know crap about how to make food, right? Presumably, other than you and your dad making pizza up there in upstate New York, right?
Yeah. I had very little experience in food service in general, except being a dishwasher from 15 to 17 years old. That was it.
Okay, not irrelevant, but usually not enough to the entire, right? So that's it. I didn't know that the unity notion started about bridging, rural and urban, right? And then obviously more. What made you think you could you had the right to own, the ampersand, right? Like, and no one had done it before.
I didn't. I think it was more about leaning into a big idea and wanting to chase that big idea. Like for me, it's always been, let me see if I can toss that proverbial football further down the field, then run after it and see if I can catch it myself. It was a big challenge. It was if I start with this, I'm going to be forced to look at this symbol every single day. I'm going to be forced to, regardless of the outcome of the business, whether it has tremendous success or not, like look that in the mirror and have that be sort of the guiding symbol and the North Star for the company, which I felt like was going to keep me more inbounds and more on track than anything else we could do, which I feel like still to this day, I think the value of having a purpose-driven company, the value of waking up every single day and having more of a compass and knowing how to navigate very uncharted territory, very muddy waters, the right way that's right for your business, and being willing to see or fail off of that is probably the best thing that ever happened to me personally from building a company, and would be something I recommend a lot of entrepreneurs consider, not necessarily chasing the dollar, but chasing the vision or the purpose behind it first and foremost, because it's really hard and it's not getting any easier. And being an entrepreneur is going to be massively difficult.
Let's unpack that. Let's separate from product from purpose, right? So just talk about the product and sort of the opening you saw in the market, because you were launched around the same time as Blaze and Mod and whatnot. But let's talk about product and then the principles that you built it on.
Yeah, so there were sort of three things that I thought about with respect to the and outside of this broader notion of unity. It was about promoting unity, doing the right thing as an employer, because I experienced so much of what that didn't look like in talking to friends that were working inside companies, just the way I was raised and the way people treated, the blue collar workforce in America, and this next notion of lifting up the lowest wage worker in this country, because like I said before, Allegheny County, the county I grew up in, was the poorest county in New York State by far. And those were the sort of the three guiding principles. And so when I looked at where we could be the most impactful, there were two stats that I came across that blew my mind. The first was that the food service industry employs 10% of America's workforce. And the second was that the restaurant industry is the second largest private employer outside of the government in the United States. And so I knew at that point that was going to be it. That was going to be the thing. If I could create a company and live these values, maybe we can be the case study that others follow, and we can enact larger scale change that really moves the needle with respect to changing what it means to be an employee in the United States, broadly speaking, especially in food service.
But how much side, just also, so obviously had these strong principles that you clearly live in your life, but how much of it also was calculated? Like, this is an Achilles heel for big pizza or these other corporations because they're never going to embrace these policies. Like, how much of the business strategy went into it at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, that was incredibly important, which is when I came across the pizza industry, which I knew about as a consumer, and I started looking at an industry that's at the time had about $45 billion of value, dominated by really four companies that were primarily succeeding off of lower quality ingredients, low wages. I don't want to call it like morally bankrupt, but heavily franchised model where it's really hard to sort of get things done with true purpose. And seeing the constant marketing engines that are driving the value of these companies, and looking at this notion of there's got to be a better way to do it. And when you do research in terms of the policies, a lot of these companies, they don't offer sick pay. As I mentioned before, it's low quality jobs, low quality wages, barely any benefits. They're making a fortune off of the hard work of a lot of people that aren't getting anything necessarily back in return, not even what we would consider to be a good job. And so pizza to me just struck me as an industry that was wildly dated in its thinking. And then looking at even what a Domino's did in 2009, 2010, or a little bit of effort coming out and saying our pizza sucks, and then building a technology platform around it, turned into a decade of the greatest performing stock this country's ever seen. And prior to that, Papa John's grew market share by saying we can make pizza a little bit better. And I'm looking at those things saying, there's got to be a way to create a company that does everything better, from wages to benefits to supply chain to really disrupting the employer-employee relationship, to democratizing decision-making, to just kind of rethinking the entire ecosystem of, if you're going to change pizza for the better, how are you going to go about doing that? And that's what gave birth to And Pizza.
So then just the pushback would have been, the conventional wisdom is that all sounds great, right? But you can't build a viable company, right, by paying a living wage. Different terminology back then, right? But that the unit economics to make a scaled, QSR, quick service restaurant, would prevent some of the policies that you're talking about. And you're a newcomer to the industry at that time, right? So how did you get comfortable that it wasn't just talk, right? That you could actually create a viable, investable, scalable business and still have those principles?
Yeah, I think what gave me the confidence was, first, like, I use my own money, and I think that's an important aspect of it, which is when you're willing to, when you're lose your own money, I think you have an easier chance of shifting and shaping your own policies. So it was about 2010 that And Pizza was conceived. We opened up our first pizza shop in July of 2012 in Washington, D.C. And one of the reasons we chose Washington, D.C. is we wanted to compete in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. I thought it was extremely important to take ourselves to some of the most competitive pizza markets as proof of concept. I knew I could make and sell mediocre pizza sort of anywhere in the United States because there's plenty of it, but can we do it in markets where people have more of a taste bud or more of historical prevalence around Italian cuisine, pizza cuisine? The other thing is, I wanted to make sure from a cultural standpoint that we put ourselves smack dab in the middle of a city I felt like was wildly diverse and inclusive, and that we could anchor ourselves, around the spirit of what we believe the ampersand should stand for. So I packed my bags, moved to Washington, D.C., and we opened up the first pizza shop at H Street Northeast, which at the time you couldn't find a Starbucks within a mile distance, which is crazy because pretty much anywhere you turn, there's a Starbucks. And so we took a big risk on the real estate. It was a disheveled building that was an old Chinese restaurant. And we, started repairing that restaurant and opened up the pizza shop, paying higher wages, sourcing higher quality food at the time, making everything in scratch, and doing so very much the opposite of how pretty much every pizza concept was succeeding. And it was wild. I mean, it was a wild ride. It took us 6 months before that made sense. But the good news is, because it was $3,000 a month in rent, you really couldn't lose that much money if you tried. And eventually, based on the positioning of the brand, right, the service, the experience, the humanizing of it, the amount of causes that we supported, a line started forming, the line wrapped around the block. And at that point, there were enough sales, right, to cure all of the decisions that we made early on, and the margin started to work. So we went from basically a no margin business to a 10% margin business to a 25% margin business in a matter of a couple of weeks, based on doing the right thing and then allowing the customers to shout from the rooftops, spread our gospel, queue up in line, and support the business with their checks.
And and I don't even know this actually. So for those watching along who have never tried And Pizza, basically uses an electric oven of sorts.
Yeah.
The details of it, it cooks your pizza in 2.5 minutes on a conveyor belt, entirely customized, anything you want. Was that the first store though? Did you do that? Like, did you launch with that same model?
Yeah, the risk that we took is we wanted to take the best of what the independent pizzerias provided, which was higher quality ingredients and a pretty interesting experience, and then marry that with the efficiencies and scale that you see in big pizza. So there's a reason why most big pizza companies have conveyor ovens or Impinger ovens, because they're really convenient. It doesn't require someone manning the oven. They're infinitely scalable in terms of a consistent quality product. But at the time, this was, like I said, this was 2012 when we made the final decision on the oven. I remember I was at a party for the Sweet Life. So Sweet Green is another Washington, D.C. headquartered brand, or at least they launched there. I had met the founders as one of the first kind of guys that I met in Washington, D.C. when I moved there from New York. They had a festival called the Sweet Life Festival, which, why would a salad concept, throw a giant festival? But it worked quite well for the brand. One of the many unconventional things they've done that have actually been, straight down the center in terms of getting it right. And they introduced me to a reporter, and they said, here's this kid, Michael. We just met him. He moved from New York. He's opening this amazing pizza concept. And the first question she asked me was, what oven are you using? And I said, actually, we're using like an electric ventless conveyor belt oven. And she looked at me like I had three heads and walked away. At that point, was just like dismissed it because it wasn't wood burning. It wasn't, Neapolitan pizza. It wasn't using coal. It wasn't that we sourced the bricks from the bottom of Mount Vesuvius. And so like, it was very frowned upon to do something, more big pizza-esque. And so we put a lot of risk in being able to put high quality ingredients into an oven that wasn't sexy and produce a high quality product. The good news is that worked. And the fact that it is electric and it is ventless has provided us with a ton of non-traditional growth opportunities because we can cook pizza in such small square footage that doesn't require traditional ventilation. So that unconventional thinking, and also the humility to recognize that those that have come before us, even if you don't necessarily believe in their values or their food or their brand, like there's a lot that you can still learn. Like they did teach us one thing, and that was a very important thing.
What about, so just, and I'll try to bring it forward in a minute or two, but I'm just curious, anybody watching out here thinks they're about to launch a business and they're pivoting from their existing career. Like, can you catalog your top 3 biggest mistakes that you made, along the journey? And those first, few, I already know them, but, I'm curious how you rank.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing was, while there was a ton of inexperience advantage in really being able to think outside the box with respect to every single decision, not everything needed to be an outside the box way of doing something. Like we failed to put together the right operating team and the right leadership team. And so it required me to spend a tremendous amount of time. I know John Rietmeyer is listening. He's Ant Pizza's CFO, a good example of when you hire the right people, it's amazing how much further you can get with respect to vision, because they know exactly how the sausage is made and can bring you there. And it took us years, right, to build an incredible management team that would be able to do those types of things. And so I missed for the first, call it 3 to 5 years of the inception of the company, of trying to do way too much myself, not getting the right people around me. And that was really detrimental because it made.
So can we make this instructive? So then the question is why? Is it something personality profile? It's because you believed you had to have all the skill sets inside of you since you were the founder. I'm just curious, why not scale immediately?
Yeah, it was because I didn't spend enough time recruiting, right? I didn't spend enough time looking for the right partners in the business. Instead, I took what was in front of me and tried to optimize it, right? Versus going, 2 or 3 steps further and saying, if I'm going to go wish up or dream up, right, the right financial officer or the right operating officer or the right operating partner, who is that person going to be, versus just dealing with what's in front of me. I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that. Right. And a lot of entrepreneurs get into business partnerships, right, with people that are right in front of them versus really thinking about, is this the marriage that I want to go into for the next 10, 20 years? And when I say,
I've given you a hard time about that, and your answer to that is like, well, easy to say in retrospect, but when you also have the practical concern that you need to raise money, right, everybody compromises, right? I mean, just to play devil's advocate now against your own top 3 list, did you have any choice but to take the money that was available in front of you?
Yeah, well, look, so when I say in terms of operating partners, I think the first one is the actual people running the day-to-day operations of the company. Like that needed to be fixed. I think when we talk about partnership, more broadly speaking, the co-founder relationship between me and the other co-founder of the business did not work out. And that was a misalignment on values, ultimately long-term. And then I think the third thing was not recognizing when you're giving up, because I had never raised capital before, right? The 2 instances of working with, banks had to do with selling my first company and selling my ad agency. I had never had experience before in raising capital and the contract that you sign with respect to what you're giving up, and probably gave up too much control of the business too early on to too many people, right? That led to some dysfunction because we couldn't figure out necessarily how to make decisions if one person didn't agree, because it required true unanimous decision making with different groups that thought very differently at different times. So that was complicated, but it was all in the pursuit of trying to do something for the first time and making a lot of mistakes, but having the fortitude to continue to press on, and then surrounding myself with partners down the road like yourself that got the vision, knew that it wasn't going to be a linear path from investing in the decision to massive success, and were willing to manage through the bumps and the kinks.
Yeah.
And the zigs and zags that we took to get to where we are today.
I also think it's really important, everybody out there who's looking to found a business and is looking to to start a business, in a space and take an unconventional path in that space needs to find a partner that really believes in you, that you're special and that your vision is special. Because if they don't and they're just paying you lip service, as soon as things get shaky, which they will inevitably when you're trying to crack into a space with an unconventional path, that veneer will fade away very quickly, and it'll create endless friction, right? So you and I, we've talked about this, right? How to make sure that your partner, your investor, your co-founder maps to your DNA in a genuine way, so that you're built to go the distance. Because if you're building something disruptive, if you're kind of
course,
the conventional way, I think it actually is less. Somebody's just money, it's a little bit less. But in your case, obviously there were going to be moments of friction because you're going to be adopting up policies that people thought weren't possible, living wage before everybody else. And so let's bring it forward, right? I want to bring it to February, right? You fought 5 years by that point in February of this year. How many years were you in business by that point?
7
years is February, right? Let's just make everything. How many units? Let's start with that. What cities you're in? Set the table before COVID hits. And then let's talk about your employee policies, your overall philosophy. Because one thing I want to make clear is a lot of things that you're doing right now, they were already on the table before, which I think gave you somewhat of an advantage when COVID struck. But let's set the table, how many units and whatnot.
Yeah, so we came into COVID in February, 40 locations. We're in Boston, New York, Philly, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. We had a pipeline of roughly 40 locations, of which 23 we intended to open in 2020. So this was going to be our explosive growth year. And we had worked really hard to build, a management team and infrastructure that had the ability, I think, to scale, and to scale quickly and to scale thoughtfully, which all of the makings for what was going to be, our best year and probably the next series of years that we're going to help put the company on the map and really define who we are.
Yeah, I mean, you're being humble about it, right? So just again, to go a little deeper, like this was finally your moment after a lot of years of struggle. Company could have toppled over at a different point, right? With internal dysfunction. Like here you are, and you have the best unit economics, in the business, north of 22% profit, right? Like, and you're about to go into a big fundraise. You hire a bank. Finally, all your hard work is going to be rewarded, and you're going to scale your employee policies. You're finally getting out there doing fast company interviews. People are discovering your wonderful personality and your beard, like getting written up everywhere. And then COVID strikes, right? Yeah. The business is decimated like overnight. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so just to understand that the makeup of our business was about 68% of our customers, if you've been to an Ant Pizza, you know what that means, would queue up in a line, right, and order a pizza off of an assembly line like you would a Chipotle or like you would a Sweetgreen or like you would a Cava. And the other 32% were those that were ordering ahead, either for pickup or for delivery. And when the pandemic hit, we lost that 68% of our business. Now, there's a couple things that were the saving grace of Ant Pizza. The first was that we made bold bets on technology and infrastructure to support our order ahead business. So our entire communications platform is text message based. We built our own native operating system, which means that all of the technology around the order ahead process isn't some amalgamation of third-party apps that are cobbled together. It's our own software. And what that enabled us to do with all of the integrations to the third-party marketplaces directly, i.e. the DoorDashes, the Uber Eats, the Caviars, the Grubhubs, the Seamlesses of the world, what that enabled us to do very quickly was pivot towards a digital first business and start building up that 32% into something significantly more meaningful. So that was a structural advantage that we had. The other was that we had a North Star of this ampersand that was all about, okay, what's the first reaction the company's going to make? Well, the first reaction was about how do we take care of our people, recognizing that many of our workers are working hourly, they're working part-time, they can't afford to miss a paycheck, they can't afford to get less hours or fewer hours. And so we raised our hand and we said, we're going to raise everyone's wage. We're going to make sure that we're providing transportation from people's homes to the pizza shops in the safest possible way in partnership with Lyft. So everyone that was taking public transportation before, now they're taking a private driver vis-a-vis Lyft. We're going to expand our sick pay benefits to make sure everyone has appropriate coverage from day one, the day you start, which is unheard of in restaurant hospitality. We're going to use our pizza to feed families, and then we're going to take it a step further, which is use our pizza to feed what we believed were the frontline heroes of the pandemic, which are the hospital workers. And I think everyone has recognized the importance of the hospital workers, doctors, nurses, administrative, cleaning staff, everyone that's helping, heal this country using our pizza. We've given away over 50,000 pizzas now. And I think those things really did a couple of things. Number one, guaranteeing people's pay, increasing their wages, using your pizza to feed hospital workers. It made it really easy for people not to show up to work, which kept the pizza shop safer. But more importantly, if you did show up to work, it gave you a purpose to be there. It gave you a distraction. It gave you a reason to dig in and to do the work, because people need that more now so than ever, given the chaos in this world. We think as an employer, one of the most important things is it's not because I pay you, you should show up. It's who are we as a group of people? Who are we as a tribe? What culture about this company? What are the things we do as leaders that actually incentivize you to get out of bed, want to come to work, want to be a part of this, and are rewarded and feel like when that shift is over, you did something that helped other people, and that feels really good.
So you get the business stabilizes, you make some of the tough decisions to keep it going, right? And then you just continue to lean more and more into it. So take us forward to the last couple of weeks and how you've approached the situation and the protests and your own team. I just want to take us behind the scenes a little bit about the kinds of conversations you were having that led to the policies that you rolled out this week.
Yeah. So to your point, the technology and the infrastructure and the digital business we built has been growing week over week over week. Last week we had our highest sales week ever. We're more than profitable in all of the pizza shops with the doors open now, and we've been able to employ over 90% of our entire workforce. So we're very proud of that, but it's because people showed up. And I think a lot of restaurant operators are finding, as they're looking to reopen, that it's hard to get people out of their homes if you weren't working through this. It's hard to bring people back because of different psychology, whether it's the way people felt that you handled the situation itself, or just the fact that they don't want to work, or they're scared to work, or they're just not used to working the way they once were. It's going to be a very difficult thing. So the advantage of our people being willing to lean in and help us was huge. And I think, very similarly, as we've been dealing with, the protests more recently have hit the markets very hard, was us making, a statement early on to recognize systemic racism, to recognize that this is all really about Black Lives Mattering, and to use our platform and our resources to allow people to be seen and to be heard. And it kind of goes back to, right, what's the and pizza? It's always been about promoting unity and doing the right thing. And so we decided as of Sunday that we were going to provide paid time off for activism to effectively allow all of our employees to feel empowered to participate in what's really important to them, what's most vital to them, and not having them choose, which I think sometimes people do, between doing what they feel is right and receiving a paycheck.
So when I saw you posted it, right, this is what I love about you. It just gets out there. People will say, oh, what was the conversation like? There wasn't like, you just do it, which is what I love. I love to open it up and see what happens. And then the questions I got from people too is like, well, how does that work? And of course, there's the cynicism and the skepticism. Right, about how do you determine what is activism or not? So just anybody out there who's listening to this and wants to do something similar, just take us through the practical elements. Like, how does it actually work?
Well, look, I think this is impossible without the team that we've built, right? I can't have a crazy idea, communicate that crazy idea, execute against that crazy idea if we don't have the people that we have inside of the company to make sure we figure out how we're going to manage it, how we're going to put policy around it, how we're going to pay for it. And that's an extremely important thing. Like, the confidence that I have and that we have now as a company, having gotten enough reps doing this, like, we are working in lockstep, and everyone has a responsibility to come together and make it happen. But more specifically, the idea of PTO for activism, within 24 hours, the team came back and they said, this is how it's going to work, right? At a very high level, everyone's going to get 3 days of paid time off in addition to their existing paid time off. And we're really going to focus on activism as more a broad idea, right? This notion that we're going to leave it to our employees' discretion to determine what's most important to them versus pigeonholing it to, well, activism for and pizza is these 3 things, and these are the 3 things that count. No, this is really about hiring people that share in a set of values, that believe in promoting unity, that believe in doing the right thing, and giving them the permission to use that paid time off for the causes that are near and dear to their heart, because everyone's different. And who am I to think that the policies that we spin up, right, are the policies that are the most important? Now, we do a lot of survey work. We try to keep our finger on the pulse. We use our text messaging platform to make sure that we're directionally correct. But there's still a lot of people out there that would rather use their time doing something else, something very different than we could ever drum up ourselves. And so let's be flexible and let's encourage that, mainly so our tribe members, our employees can be seen and heard.
Well, you made a good, when I asked you the question, you used Patagonia as an example, as somebody's kind of already done it, but also, which I think is a good point, a lot of companies allow paid time off for volunteerism. So sending a message to your team saying activism and volunteerism, are two sides right of a coin, basically saying you're making a contribution to your society. I don't need to judge which type of contribution you're making. So here's a big picture question, right? Which, we and I go back and forth about. You are not only a person, Michael Lastoria, with strong views, right? And have protested, in DC, and I know your politics, right? But then you also preside over a company and a brand. Right? Where's the line these days? How much can a company be out there and say, no, not only, do I support these policies, but I'm against the Trump administration, and I see now the two are kind of bleeding together, but just what's your personal view? Are they going to bleed together more and more in the future? And is it acceptable for somebody to take a political stance as the head of a brand?
Yeah, I think two things. I think first, what really helps founder-led brands, at least in the early stages, is that the brand takes on the founder's personality, and that's what really helps humanize it. And that's why it makes those brands so relatable, because people can see through the brand to other human beings that are behind it, that are doing the work. And that's why they really want to support it. I think over time, you have to recognize that from a cultural standpoint, every time you hire someone, right, every time you make a change, right, the culture, right, which is the sum of ingredients, the ingredients are its people, that's also going to shift. So you have to spend a lot of time making sure that the reason you exist, right, your purpose, your values are clear, that you're hiring people against those, and that you are constantly willing to listen, right, and you're constantly willing to take criticism to make sure that you're getting things right over time. So I may believe something, right, the majority of And Pizza employees may not. Like, what the brand is going to stand for is what the majority of the people believe that work inside the company is the right thing to do. So now our platform and the things that we get behind are really about what our tribe members, what our employees, it's the social issues that affect them the most, that are closest to them, that we put the weight of the company behind. And because we have the ability to do that, it's using their voices through our platform and marrying the two.
A question for you. So you're 40, by the way. Congratulations.
I just turned 40. Thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to remind you, I'm glad you joined my decade. I'm 45, right? Curious, we've been around the block now for a bit, and this time feels different, right? We've seen a lot of horrible things happen, and we've seen protests in our lifetime, but this feels different to you. And from my perspective, the difference here is I'm seeing a level of empathy that I have not seen before. I think in the past, you'd find people would use the protests or any kind of violence that happened as a result of it, right, looting, to dismiss the underlying spark. And I think what I'm finding fascinating is people are not allowing that to lose sight of the spark, right? That racism needs to end in this country. We need to take a stand and finally do. People are sick and tired in a way, but curious, I just want to hear from you. Is it different? Will this lead to fundamental change going forward?
I'm hopeful that it will. I think that people's reaction, broadly speaking, has changed because of the visual nature of what we all saw. I don't know how you watch a 9-minute video, of someone, a single individual's knee on another human's being neck, and not react and not have such heightened emotions around imagining that as someone that you love, someone that you care about, and not reacting to wanting to make sure that never happens again. I think it's just one of those things. I think people are tired, and I think me as a white male, it's more about listening and trying to understand, right, the psychology of, and then also using my own emotions, because it was disgusting to me as a human being, wanting to do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen again, and to try to create equality. I mean, the founding principles of this country are right, yet we're not necessarily living them out in politics and through policy. And I think that has to change. I was listening to a podcast earlier today. I believe by 2040, the minority of this country will be the majority. Right. And so when you think about Gen Z, when you think about your children, right, they will be working with a group of people who are the majority. And so from that perspective alone, change is coming. We all know change is coming.
And I do, and I tend to be optimistic. You're very optimistic, right? Sometimes we can be, delusional, but I believe in it. And I remember I gave the commencement speech at my college last year, and I was thinking about how do I contextualize the following point: things always get better, right? And just generally the same. If you look from 20,000 feet, it's not always obvious when you're on the ground, but if you look from above, things are always getting incrementally better. And I think, and I even look at the statistics around, marriage equality, that when I went to school talking to that same group, that same spot, right? 70% of Americans were against it when I graduated. And now talking to that same group, 20 something years, 70% are for it. So I do believe fundamentally that the change is that the environment is different now, and something is different about it that it'll lead to lasting change. But what if you could wave a wand, and we're talking to all your colleagues in fast casual and QSR, what are some of the policies that you think are practical that could be adopted now that you'd like to see spread?
Yeah, we're working through what we think are the right policies for AND. I think the idea behind starting with paid time off for activism was making sure that, we gave our workforce an opportunity to, I mentioned before, be seen and be heard. I also think it's very important that, brands and human beings recognize that while the reaction to the protests initially, was about a moment, like this is really about a broader movement. And we have to really focus on not this being like the thing that everyone is paying attention to for a matter of days or weeks, but the thing that we're all committed to changing in the long term. I think that approach from a brand standpoint will go a long way, because we don't necessarily need, right, public policy to change, even though I'm fundamentally believe that that's going to happen. If we all start behaving more as human beings and we use our own voices, I think we can shift and shape that policy.
I agree.
Right? I think companies can do the right thing. I think they can address, right, the issue with systemic racism. I think we can create internal policy, and I think we can be leading that change in a lot of different ways by leading by example. And by the way, it's going to make us better companies. I've never been in a conversation where the right outcome with a more diverse audience, right, didn't happen. Like diversity is so key to great decision making. It's so key to empathy. It's so key to understanding, whether it's on the product side, whether it's on the service side. Like how we're better at everything come through understanding people.
So let's pivot to implementation, because I love this question. I saw it in the corner of my eye from Katrina. I don't know if you could see it, but I could read it to you. If I have a hard time getting the stakeholders of our clients on board to be this human centric, how did you, or what approach did you take to convince the board or decision makers to make these moves rather than close and pause everything? Don't give the politically correct answer too. Let's just talk about how do you bring people along?
Well, I think a lot of it is about, and I kind of go back to it's just easier for us because we're smaller. It's easier for us because we started off with purpose, that when we do these things, it doesn't come as a surprise to shareholders because we've been doing these things for a very long time. We tend to be one of the first to get into a conversation or to spark a conversation because that's just who we are as a group of people. That's why people come to work for And Pizza. We are a Washington, D.C. based brand. We're a Northeast Washington, D.C. based brand. And so as a result of that, we have more permission to do this type of stuff than another company otherwise would that maybe has history of not. And it's something that you specifically want to see have changed. Well, now you have to change the psychology of a shareholder that maybe has been invested for years and years and years or decades that doesn't understand this stuff because they haven't been taught to understand it as it relates to this particular brand. So I think it's about, as I said before, this is less about a moment and more about a movement. And if you can't get people there today, get them there tomorrow. It's what are you doing hour by hour, day in and day out to convince them? And I think the consistency of that will absolutely shape and sway opinion because people's opinions are changing by the hour, right? People I knew that had a very different opinion about something a week ago are thinking very differently about it today. And that's going to be the same, I think, for many, many, many weeks to come, leading up to one of the most important elections this country's ever seen. inside of arguably one of the most challenging economic environments where unemployment's at its highest, the death rates are continuing to rise, and people are struggling. And so I think everyone is going to be open or more open to, there's got to be a better way to do things. There's got to be a new normal that makes more sense to me, and open to listening now more. I mean, I think that the protests support that, right? The universal nature of these protesting suggests that more people are listening, more people want to learn, and more people want to participate more now than ever before.
Well, let's take we'll take 2 more questions, but I want to follow up. I'll give you Katrina, I'm going to give you my perspective on that as being one of those stakeholders. I think when you back Michael, you knew that this is what you'd sign up for. You don't know how it'll be expressed. You don't know how employee-centric policies that are very progressive and that are that are about the ampersand and what we represent, but you know that this is what you signed up for. And I think that's really important as somebody launching a business, which way you want to be careful with the compromises you make in the beginning to take the money. Because if you want to paper over some of the ways in which you plan to be disruptive, unconventional, some of the ways in which you have personal predilections or idiosyncrasies that are going to create friction later, you might as well put them out on the table. Same with your philosophies, right? So that it's very clear to everybody that this is what you signed up for. So going back to Michael, that's why I don't want to take credit like there's some big strategy session that goes around them. Like, you follow your instinct, you do what's right, and you deserve 100% of the credit. And you surrounded yourself with people who back that vision. But very, very important. If you didn't have that group, you would have debated it to death. Well, how's the PTO policy going to work? I mean, is there going to be a requisition form? Are they going to go to Bob, in HR, who's going to determine what activism qualifies, right? You could have debated that one policy to oblivion and rendering it completely moot. But instead, you decided, and you didn't. What's great about you too is that you don't need to have all the details worked out, where the details don't matter as much, right? Especially in this case, and you roll with it. But again, none of that happens for you as a founder if you didn't surround yourself at least with the right people. I mean, we're pain in the asses too on everything else. Like, I don't want to act like we're heroes, but in this one important area, everybody knows this is what we signed up for with your company, right?
I also think you have to be willing to be okay with it not working out. You have to be okay with the potential failure and the backlash that comes with it.
Well, look at that when DC was shut down, right? Wasn't that your trial run? Like, we just decided to give away pizza to everybody, right? Who was
that was a very expensive trial one, but one that we built a tremendous amount of goodwill. When the federal government shut down, we gave away free pizza. Had no idea it was going to last for over 4 weeks. We were going to give away, roughly 30,000, free pizzas to government workers, but that got us in the cadence and in the habit of being a first responder to situations like this. Also, I think you get permission with your workforce when you roll things out or try things. They're not expecting this to be perfect, and they're willing to roll with it. And I think that's really important, which is just goes back to getting reps in. Like, you're not going to get good at anything if you don't try it and do it over and over and over again. So the 10,000 hours thesis as it applies to, company decision-making and policy, we just believe that boardroom benefits are not real benefits. If most of the population of your workforce isn't using them, then they aren't considered to be real benefits. And benefits that people are used to may not even be the right benefits. And be willing to just change everything so that your people can feel appreciated, feel supported, feel protected. And look, I think advocacy and activism is extremely important. I would love for people to want to come to, think about this from a recruiting standpoint. If we, like a Ben and Jerry's, right, can get people to come work at Ann Pizza because we're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and because they can be involved in activism at the highest levels, right, because a lot happens in Washington, D.C., and that becomes our greatest recruiting tool ever, which is an entire possibility. If I couldn't get that person from San Francisco or New York City to move to D.C. before, but now because of this, they want to come because this is so important to them and their family. And now Washington, D.C., which historically speaking has been a hard place to recruit people, now because of these policies may be the very reason we're able to recruit some of the best people in America to come work for this company.
Well, I've already kept you 50 minutes, but why don't we end on this topic, because I'm curious to your thoughts, right? The world is starting to open up again. Country's starting to open up again. Can you just set expectations? What exactly is happening right now in terms of what's open, what's not, and how you see food just playing out?
Yeah, man, it's going to be tough. I'm a little bit bearish on the broader restaurant industry, given the longevity of the sort of broad-based issues that we're dealing with right now, it's not about a matter of months. It's how you can survive for the next couple of years before we return to some version of normalcy. So I think it's going to be really hard as it relates to, and I think you're going to see a lot of restaurant closures, unfortunately, because a lot of restaurant brands, structurally speaking, built their companies off of great food and great service. And now you're required to be and do so much more than those two things, right? You actually have to understand what a digital first mentality is. You have to understand technology. You have to really be structured to deliver an off-premise product and experience well. You have to have a brand that matters. You have to be willing to take a stand on key social issues where you're going to get consumers continuously spend with you. Like, it just doesn't work the way it used to work. And a lot of groups and restaurants and entrepreneurs weren't prepared for that. And that's going to be a really big challenge. That's why we're trying to, as an open book, be a bit of a case study for trying a bunch of things and sharing with our colleagues, our coworkers, our peer group, hey, these are the things that are working really well. Encourage you to do them to help you out. As it relates to us, we're getting ready to open up dining rooms and patios in our Northern Virginia locations, which actually starts today. So I'll have a lot more to report on, and Andy Hooper, our company's president's down there right now, have a lot more to report on what that looks like in the coming weeks in terms of lessons learned with respect to, what's working, what's not working, what's the general sentiment. But it's definitely a crazy time, and we're just trying to do our best to put our best foot forward day in, day out.
Can you answer that question from Steve? How do you see walk the line in the next 90 days?
Steve, how you doing, buddy? Steve's an incredible guy. I don't know. I mean, we're predicting that. So the way that we did our financial modeling, we're predicting about a third of the walk the line business comes back, scaling up to about 80% of what it was prior by year's end. That being said, we've had a number of shops in suburban locations over the last 2 weeks that are doing the same sales volume they were this time last year, and doing it without a walk the line business at all. And in 3 of our locations last week, we saw positive comping, which is phenomenal given we started off with 32%, right, of those sales when we came into this pandemic. So seeing that massive sales growth and adoption to a digital first environment has been really rewarding, to know that those investments are paying off and we're able to be there in a new environment with a platform that can support, making and serving pies to our customers.
I'm going to end with one, Michael. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it, but I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Okay. Wait for it.
Yeah.
Wait for it. What do you think?
I don't see anything.
You don't see it? Oh, all right. This is from Angelica. What about paid day off to go voting?
Okay. So we are, that's a great one. So we are penning right now an announcement that we're going to make starting loosely over this weekend, then big announcement on Monday. We're going to shut down all of our pizza shops on election day, including providing paid time off for voting. And we're going to put a lot of weight behind the general and broader education, especially for the Gen Zers of the world. They are the most activist oriented, the most advocacy oriented. I mean, they've been on top of every key social issue for the last 3 to 5 years that we've seen. But voting and voter turnout remains to be relatively low. So putting a lot of the weight behind the company of this notion of how can we use our collective voices to get to the polls and make a difference. But we feel like, and we're going to try to start a movement around it, to get every restaurant retail brand that we know to be willing to close their shops. I mean, me personally, and pizza aside, I think the election day in America should be a holiday. Perhaps it could be the new President's Day, perhaps not. But there's a lot to be said about making sure we make it really, really easy to get all voters to turn out. It's the opposite of voter suppression. Yeah,
I 100% agree with you. Election day should be a holiday, right? We should make it as easy as humanly possible. You know how I feel about this topic. So why don't we end on that? Since now you just stepped on your own news, but I couldn't resist. Anyway, I'm so proud to be associated with you. Like, you are a special human being and have done so many great things. I'm so glad you're, by the way, getting out there for a bit. Like, you were a little uncomfortable with, being quasi.
I'm still uncomfortable.
I know, but we're gonna change that, right? That's why you have me to help architect it. But all kidding aside, if a tree falls in a forest, right, no one's around to hear it. So we got to make sure that everyone hears your mission, your mandate, your principles, so that they begin to spread as they are starting to spread now. And I think if you just continue to own the moments when people are suffering and do what you're doing, you're going to make massive change in this world. I've always, the minute we spend time together, I said, your destiny is pretty incredible. You know, you're some version of Howard Schultz and Merlin, I guess, with the beard. Like, I don't quite know, you're an amalgam, but you're magic. And I think the world is going to get to know you, and just keep doing what you're doing, you know, and great to have you on. Look,
well,
wow.
First off, Matt,
we need more people like Michael. You don't have to praise me now. I can be a pain in the ass too. I want to only praise you. All right.
No, well, look, I mean, listen, I thank you for your unwavering support. We've been through a lot together, and just for everyone who follows Matt Higgins, know that, you know, this type of stuff that he's doing, it's from his heart, and I get it day in and day out. You guys get it time to time, but it's extremely important you surround yourself with investors and partners that are willing to go all in on the values, you as a person, and support you, not just professionally, but personally and emotionally. Right? These businesses are hyper emotional, and they're more emotional now than ever before because we're leading with our heart, and it takes big hearts to support big hearts. And Matt, thank you for everything you've done to allow us to be bolder, for me to come outside of my comfort zone and do more of this stuff. I still get nervous. My palms still sweat.
Nervous,
so thank you for that. Yeah.
You know, but we're still here, right? That's the amazing part. Look at it, still standing 7 years later and stronger than ever, right?
Absolutely.
Pretty
Absolutely.
Incredible. All right, go run your company. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I have Shark Tank tomorrow. We have Mindy, who is the casting director of Shark Tank, Michael, to tell us all the secrets about what does it take to get on the show, and what does it take to make a great pitch. It's not just about how to land on Shark Tank. So anyone who's interested in actually just learning how do I close a shark or how do I close a VC, Mindy's going to break it down. She's seen every pitch for the last, I don't know how many years. 40,000 people apply every year to be on Shark Tank, and only 150 end up on set. So I'm going to go talk to Mindy, get the answers to the test. So even if you're not interested in being on Shark Tank, but just generally want some great advice, it'll be a great session. Just check my LinkedIn feed to find out what time, because I can't remember. And thanks for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow.